Time for the Mayo Jam.
Hi, and welcome to the Mayo Jam Podcast. We're very happy to have you featured on this in this week's episode. Welcome, Vikram Chandra, the writer of Sacred Games, the winner of many prizes, and this year the winner of the Gibson Prize at the Mayo Prize Giving.
Thank you so much for having me on.
It is a pleasure indeed to want to talk to you about Mayo, sitting at Mayo for the prize giving. I'll start with the basics, Vikram. Which were the years that you were at Mayo?
I joined in 73 in this 6th grade. And then after the 10th board exams, I left. So that was 78.
78. Wow. So that was 5 years spent in Mayo.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What is the most everlasting memory of that time?
I mean, I guess Leo Puri, our chief guest at the prize giving, was just talking about the friendships that you make, right? The brotherhood. I mean, you're far away from home and you spend your life sort of shoved together. Often in very adverse circumstances, right? So it builds something between you that never goes away. And actually, all yesterday and today, for my batch, of course, we have a WhatsApp group. And I've been sending them pictures and taking requests. What do you guys want to see? And reporting in, right? So, I mean, and now, modern communications makes it much easier to stay in touch than it did back then in the days of postcards, and inland letters.
Like he said, these everlasting relationships, don't they become difficult to sustain once you sort of, you kind of grow apart as you grow up, no?
You do, but I mean, I guess not with everyone, but there's always some friends, you see them 10 years later and you pick up as if it were yesterday, right? And so certainly there's people in the batch that I'm still very close to, and I have this sense with them. I have to say, I'm really bad at keeping in touch with people. So I tend to let that happen, right? That you let people drop out of your life. But with these few people, it's an instant connection, right? And I think they feel the same way also.
That's so good. It's always nice to have such people in our lives. I think they make life more bearable.
And they sustain you, right? Through good times and bad times. And so,
absolutely. And Mr. Puri talked about that as well.
Yeah. And, like he said, they don't judge you, and they are people who will always be kind to you and generous to you, even in your worst times, right? So that feeling makes me very grateful for having been here and having met these people.
So, what they say nowadays, that these are your 2 a.m. friends? Is
yes,
that what you're saying?
Indeed, yeah.
When we were at Mayo, there was no phrase 2 a.m. friends.
Yeah, I guess. Langotia yaar.
Langotia yaar. Absolutely. Were you up to a lot of mischief when you guys were here, or were you a very goody boy?
No, I was very studious, and I think the teachers all thought I was very good. But we got up to stuff in the dawns, right? And like after lights out, and all of that kind of stuff. I broke bounds, right, all the time because I'm a movie fanatic. And I just felt like the sort of sense of imprisonment that you got as you grew older, that became frustrating to me, right? Okay. And I actually got expelled. I got sent home for breaking bounds. They let me back in to take my board exams. But so what happened was that I was a big Zeenat Aman fan, like a fanatic. I mean, really. And there were 2 factions on campus at the time. There was like Zeenat Aman fans and Parveen Bavi fans. And I was one of the leaders of the Zeenat Aman fan club. So there's this movie called Dharamveer, really Manmohan Desai, bizarre film, right? As Manmohan Desai stuff is, anyway, I won't go on about the movie, but Zeenat Aman was in it. I had seen it twice already, and then I heard this bunch of guys were going to go see it. So I tagged along and saw the movie, and then when we came back, somebody saw us coming sneaking through the fence. And so the next day, we were told just to go home, right?
So that was harsh. I mean, that was your first infringement and you got sent home.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. So what had also happened was that I, as a nerdy, bookish kid, I became editor of the Mayur, right?
Okay.
And I used to write these kind of revolutionary editorials, chafing against the way the system was. So I had been kind of put on notice for that. My friend Parmatha Saikya, Pago, and I were called into the principal's office, the then principal's office, and he said something about we should all learn how to live cooperatively together, which I was too stupid to realize. What he was saying was, make a mistake. And so, yeah, that was quite traumatic. I mean, so somehow they didn't actually manage to tell my parents that I was on the way. And so I show up at 9:30 in Bombay. I ring the bell. And my mother opens the door and says, "What are you doing?" So anyway, I mean, it all worked out finally in the end. I was at home for a couple of months, and then they let me get back in, right? And what I'd come take the board exams, and but what was interesting, like every time I've entered this new campus, they have this damn wall topped with barbed wire. I was like, felt very sorry for the kids. Like,
Yeah.
how do you do that? That's why I wanted to ask them, like, do you guys break bounds? How do you manage it? Like, must be like a prison escape operation.
Yeah, I can't relate to that because across the road in the girls' school, we never got the opportunity. I don't think I would have even had the guts to do that.
I mean, as always for women,
it's different.
It's a dangerous place. The world.
It is. Yeah. But still, it's very fascinating to know you actually, for a studious boy, you actually just decided you're going to break the bounds and go watch a movie.
No, and if one loves Zeenat Aman, then one must take risks.
Have you met Zeenat Aman?
No. I mean, my family's all in the film industry. One of my sisters, Anupma, is the film critic.
Yeah.
And my other sister, Tanuja, is a director and screenwriter. And my mother has written a bunch of like Chandni and Prem Rog and 1942 love story. So I've kind of grown up around that industry, but she's one person that I've never crossed paths with.
That's too bad.
Yeah. Well,
she should know a young boy somewhere almost put his career at risk for her.
Yeah, well, we can hope.
She's grown older and even more gorgeous.
I know. Yeah, she's amazing. I don't know. Yeah, so maybe I'll run into her at some point.
I hope for your sake you do. So, coming back to Mayo and given that you're such a successful writer now, was there anything at Mayo? I mean, I know now you're saying you were the editor of Mayo already, so I mean, promising signs already. But anything about Mayo which instilled the discipline that requires?
I mean, the first time I actually got published in a kind of public way was at Mayo, right? So. And I have my friend Nilesh Navlakha to thank for that. He was my batch, of course. So I used to write, I was very into science fiction at the time. So in the back of my whatever notebook that was, I used to write sci-fi stories.
Really?
So Nilesh said, and this was in first semester, 6th grade, first term. And he said, why don't you give this to the Mayur? And I was like very hesitant. But I did, and they published it, and that was the beginning of the whole thing for me, because that was such a thrill, right? So I was telling you earlier that, it is a very macho school, right? Very sporty, and I was not that at all. I was a nerdy little, thickly bespectacled bookworm, and that helped me find my place in the environment, right? So yeah, there was that, and then the library, which I think was and is amazing. So I spent a lot of time in the library, and then I had a couple of English teachers who were really kind to me, especially Yogi Jain, J.I. Singh, Jinx, we used to call him. And that's how it all started, right? And and in terms of discipline, I think, again, as we were saying, the ability to take risks, right? Because writing anything or creating anything, as you know, and putting it out there, you're a writer, right? You're a journalist. And so it's a risk to take, right? Because you put your voice out there in the world, and who knows how people are going to react.
Absolutely.
So I think that confidence in, okay, maybe it'll fail, right? Maybe people will hate this, but you throw it out there and see what happens, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, but it's amazing, I always say, I mean, writing a book is like a major thing. You need discipline. I remember somebody telling me in one of my ET interviews that I just took to writing 200 words a day because otherwise I was never going to be able to finish this. And I've tried writing a blog and not been able to sustain it beyond 6 months because it just requires a lot of discipline. Did you learn that in Mayo?
Yeah.
That focus, that...
I think so. I mean, it's hard to discern, right? Whether, I mean, I do think so that it did teach me resilience, particularly, right? Because, like you said, I mean, writing a book, this is one of my lines that I always inflict on my students is that writing a book is not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And you have to do, like you said, a little bit every time, keep a steady pace. I do 400 words a day, right?
Is that your...
Yeah. And that's very, very slow, right? And I write big books. So, I mean, in an entire lifetime of writing, I've only published 4 books, right? So, which is frustrating for me sometimes. I have friends who write these amazing books and they publish something every 3 years. And I'm like, how the hell do you do that? But it's like, you find your pace, and then I know it works for me despite the frustration. And you just do it.
Are there manuscripts that have never seen the light of the day? Because
early on, I have one, I guess, novella that I wrote as an undergrad, as my senior thesis. I did my undergrad work at a Pomona college near LA, and there they let you. I was an English major, but they let you write a creative honors thesis. So that thing, I don't even know where it is, but I think properly it should not have been published.
That's a good one. It should not have been published. I think we feel, there's some blogs or rather articles I've also written which I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking?
No, but that's constant, right?
Yeah.
Because, you look back at your earlier work and you cringe sometimes, right?
Yeah, you do.
But that's part of the
But
game.
you do the same when you look at your earlier pictures also. You're like,
my
God, did I wear that?
Well, except for, oncoming age. I guess one should age gracefully, but it is a kind of scary thing.
It is.
I was in Jaipur House, right, in the common room, and they have those annual pictures that they used to do, and they had my batch, in there, right, which is amazing after all this time. You can kind of see this little bespectacled face. Wow, It's interesting to look back at one's own childhood because that's part of the bravery, right? Like you came out here and you managed to get through it and you feel kind of empathy, right, for that person that you used to be.
And that, I think you develop that self-belief that Leo spoke about as well, because you also sometimes look around and say, if I survive this, I can actually survive anything outside.
Yeah, no, I have 2 kids, 2 girls, 12 and 14. And I send them pictures of the assembly hall on WhatsApp, and the younger one, Bean, said, "Oh, that's so pretty." And then I took pictures of the dorms, and I said, "Look, it's inside that beautiful exterior. These were the Spartan conditions that we lived in." Yeah, and there's actually, I can't remember who said this. Somebody said about British public schools is that they train you really well for prison.
Ouch.
It's a bit of an exaggeration, obviously. But so, this kind of, very privileged life we lead at these institutions, but it's weirdly hard, right? They make it hard,
Also the first time that you come here, because you're not used to that, at least I wasn't used to that kind of discipline.
Right.
I remember, even a simple thing like the chapatis that they served in the mess, the first week was shocking because you were used to hot pulkas.
Yeah.
And then the mess food, although the Mayo Girls food was fantastic and still is, but I think these things sort of, and you're very young.
Yeah.
And to make those changes, I think that's tough.
Yeah.
Are you ever tempted to send your daughters to a boarding?
No, I'm too attached.
Hope your mom's not listening to this.
Yeah, my parents, we moved to Delhi when I think I was in 8th grade, and they really wanted me to come home, and I was the one who said no, I don't want to, because I was too attached to I knew this life and I knew how to live it, and I had a lot of really good friends. The reason I left after the 10th was, because of this, my feeling of like I'm 16, I'm grown up.
I want to free a world.
I want to free a world, and also I think the only boys' school part of it was starting to get a little. I wanted the glamour of the big cities.
And Bombay is glamorous.
Indeed, yeah.
So nobody blames you for leaving Ajmer for Bombay. We've got aspiring writers. Not amongst just the current students, but also the alumni. Anything that you'd like to share with them in terms of how they can prep themselves for hopefully success, even if not like yours, but somewhat along your lines.
Well, I mean, I think, so I was talking about the library, right? And that was really a lot of my education in, not just in a kind of let's study literature, but as a writer happened with all the reading, right, that I used to do here, and repeated reading, right? So, I mean, it sounds like a really stupid thing to say, but I think the more you read, the more you learn how to write, right?
Agreed.
And what I mean by repeated reading is that when I read something that I really love, the first time I read it, I'm so lost in that world. I have no sense of how it's been constructed, right? So, and I think you read it again and you read it 5 times, and then finally I can start to see the craft, right? And I'm giving a lecture on this is what I tell my students, right? That read like a writer at some point, right? So especially something that has blown you away, read it 10 times and then you start to see what techniques are being used.
That's
Right.
such a fantastic thing, Somehow I haven't,
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
You're so absorbed in that book.
Yeah.
Like I do, I don't do that much creative thing, but I remember reading this book, Tools of Titans, recently, Tim Ferriss.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I loved it. And then
Yeah.
I kept going back to it. But like you said, I've never looked at it as the craft. I've
Yeah,
only
yeah.
ever looked at it as a,
Yeah. Yeah.
tool, and as you like what you're reading and you're
Yeah.
absorbed in that
Yeah,
world.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you reverse engineer what that
Yeah.
person has done to you, right? And I think in other domains, people do this, right? Like if you look at software that is really good, you try and figure out like why is it so good? Curiously, in art, I think not curiously, because it gives us such pleasure and grace, we forget to do this, right? But as a professional artist, everyone does this, right? If you talk to musicians, this is what they do, right? And painters, and you try and understand the construction, the architecture, right?
I completely agree with you. That's what I'll end up looking at an Excel sheet. When you see it, you see
Yeah.
it's beautifully,
Yeah.
set up, and you look back and you say, how did they do it?
Do it,
But
right.
I've never done that with a book.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
such a, that's fantastic advice, I think.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I know it's very hard, is just show up at your desk, even if it's for half an hour on a regular basis, and write your 200 words or 400. I fail at this all the time, right? But ideally, that's what I want to do, right? And just maintain a steady pace. And one day, amazingly, you have a finished manuscript.
I hope you will inspire me to go back to my blog.
Yeah.
I really had fun writing it last year.
Yeah, see, there you
It
go.
was just simple, slice of life kind of
Right.
posts, but I had
Yeah.
fun, and then I just gave up. I don't know why I did that.
Yeah, things slide away, right? And life takes over, and you have kids, and somebody has to go get the coffee and the vegetables, right? And it's just
Life happens.
and
And then writing suffers.
yeah, indeed, yeah.
What do you tell yourself on days like that?
Well, yeah. You try and be easy on yourself, right? I have to say, I'm being very confessional on this public. So, it does end up in like self-loathing almost, right? Like, why are you so lazy? You need to get back to work, right? And but you've got to give yourself a break, and especially if you're in a time of stress. All of us have been during this whole pandemic madness, and then both in India and in the States, which are the 2 countries that I'm part of. There's all this political madness, right? That is going on. That I sometimes don't want to wake up and read the paper. So I think you can forgive yourself for a lot, but eventually you want to get back.
You want to get back,
Yeah.
Tough one to do.
Yeah.
In terms of what you teach, and this is a good point for me to at least tell the audience that Vikram teaches at the UCB, the University of California, Berkeley, and that's where he lives as well. And do you sort of also teach them, like you said, of course, read something that to see the craft. But is there anything you also teach them in terms of creative lessons, tools, writing guidebooks?
Yeah. So, what I do is writing workshops, right? So the students, we read published fiction in this kind of analytical way, and then they each write usually 2 stories a semester and revise them. And then they bring them into class, and then we workshop them, right? And we workshop them repeatedly, right? So it's a very iterative process, right? Yeah, and nobody creates good art on the first try, right? So you're talking about books. There's a very good book about the craft of fiction, which is by Janet Burroway, and I think it's called Writing Fiction or something like that. And the title of her first chapter is Shitty First Drafts.
Shitty First Drafts, absolutely.
Yeah. And so then you move on from there. And then, I mean, I have recently got very interested in the psychology of creativity, and creativity not just in the writing or artistic sense, but in any domain, right? And there's some interesting research that is coming out right now about that. So for one thing, there's one paper that asserts that going into nature for even 3 days and coming out sort of ramps up your ability to think flexibly, right?
Oh, wow.
The other thing, and encounters with the sublime, right? By which they mean the sublime as in the mixture of terror and awe, right? Like when you're standing and looking up at the Himalayan peak, right, above you, and the sun is gold on it, there's a huge sense of beauty, but it also makes you very small, right?
Yes.
Stand above the Niagara Falls, and so apparently that has a disruptive effect on your mind, so that your usual patterns are disrupted. So I don't know. I mean, as you can tell, recently I've become very interested in this kind of thing.
Psychology of creativity. I like that phrase.
And the other thing which I felt very vindicated about is that I have some of my biggest breakthroughs in the shower. So you get into that meditative state, which means I waste a lot of water
in California.
And which I should feel guilty about the environment. But so I didn't know that was actually a recognized condition, right? So often the other thing that happens to me is in that half state between waking and sleep, that fuzzy medium space. Apparently, that's a space where your mind lets go in some way of itself, so that you get breakthroughs, right? And ideas. And there's a lot of them on YouTube and Spotify. I can't remember what it's called, but how you can induce this intentionally.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, I'm getting very esoteric.
Not at all. Let me ask you a predictable question now. Which is your favorite book?
That's very hard. That's very, very hard. I mean, some of the stuff that I just was on the plane. For some reason, I've been wanting to read Premchand again, right? So I started, and so Namak Ka Daroga and all those amazing stories. So that, I think, that was a big influence on me.
We did that in Mayo. We had Premchand as part of the syllabus.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, what I was thinking about yesterday on the plane was that his incredible sympathy for the poor and the dispossessed, and his frankness in dealing with the shittiness of the caste system and all of that. It's amazing stuff. The other half was, I guess, again, going back then, the British Victorian writers, Thackeray, William Makepeace Thackeray, and Anthony Trollope. Those were a big influence. Some of the Hindi fiction writers that I read back then. So it's it just depends on when you ask me, right? Like today, if you ask me, I would say Premchand's short stories.
I haven't heard Namak Ka Daroga in forever.
Yeah.
So that's a great one. I always felt that in school, one of the things they don't teach you, and which I've tried very hard to teach my boys, is review.
Right,
You write something and it's only later that they tell you, like the Economist Guide tells you, every word that you can take out, please take it out without altering the meaning of the sentence. They never teach you those things at school.
Oh, you're right. Right. Yeah, I mean, the whole art of craft of writing is revision, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, of Sacred Games, which is a pretty fat book, 900 pages, I think I did 14 revisions of it, right?
14 revisions?
Yeah. And then for the last book, which is nonfiction called Geek Sublime, and I had never written nonfiction before. So it's a form very foreign to me. I ended up doing, if I'm not mistaken, 34 revisions, right?
Wow.
And then, the first 5 revisions are always pretty major.
Yes.
Because you're moving structure and you're having to deal with chapter breaks and all of that kind of stuff. But and then it gets finer, right? Then you're working on, like you said, on sentences and words and so forth. But
to show patience then.
Yeah.
Beyond, even when I used to write stories, you could read it twice, but by the time the third and the fourth time, you started glossing over.
You get sick of it. I mean, the technique to get around that is that you give yourself a break, right? Yes. So you put it in a drawer and you don't think about it for 2 weeks, and then you come back and look at it.
Fresh set of eyes.
Fresh, and stuff as simple as when I'm about to do a revision, instead of trying to revise on the screen first, print it out. Okay. Right? So then you see just the different physical format of what you've written, and lets you see it alone and stops you glossing over, right? Like you said.
Very interesting. Yeah. I have to somehow get you back to Mayo and on the campus.
I'd love to come, yeah. I want to spend more time here and talk to the kids, right? Because it's changed a lot since I was here, obviously. But I really regret not having a chance to sit and just ask them about their lives, right? Like, what is it now like in the dorms? Is it still the same? Is it different?
And to have you back, come here and teach a class in creative writing. Yeah. I mean, imagine the kind of exposure to our girls and boys.
Yeah.
So there is this whole move that's happening towards this whole One Mayo concept, which makes it very, very exciting now. I mean, the reason we wanted to not miss this chance of having you on the podcast is because we want to give access. I don't even know how many of the girls know that you're a Mayoite.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I was equally blindsided. I'm feeling so bad. I would have happily carried my copy of Sacred Games from Delhi to have it, autographed. But here we are. So it would be so nice if we could do that.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Yeah.
Do you come often to India?
I think at least twice a year.
Then we must. I mean, we should have you come back and have you come and do a class with them. We had some great teachers in my time also. So I still remember, and the teacher, I think, in especially subjects like literature, makes all the difference because they suddenly bring alive that entire cast and character in front of you. So did you have a teacher like that?
Well, I said Yogi Jain, right?
Yes.
What is his name? I'm going to forget. Rahul Bedi. But he was here only for a semester.
Okay.
And Jai Singh, Jinx, we used to call him. And so there were 2 or 3 in the way of like literature and English classes who I still remember with great affection. Did
you do well in math as well? Or were you a total literature student?
I did well. I did well, but it's not like my thing, right? So I had to work really hard.
Hard at it.
And which was so what happened was then, like I said, I left after the 10th and I went to Bombay and I mean, my parents are great. They've always supported me in whatever I wanted to do, but there was, especially at that time, this sense that, you have to do sciences, right?
Yeah.
If you're a boy, very sexist, and your professions were very limited, doctor, civil services, that kind of thing.
And nobody's parents wanted them to be an author.
Well, my mother's a writer, right? And so she knew how hard it was. Yeah. And I knew how hard it was. She used to write a play like 2 hours long for Doordarshan, and she would get a check for 25 rupees, right? And I mean, literally that, I'm not exaggerating. So I had seen all this. I was completely acquainted with it. So my friend Sanjeev Aggarwal, Mayo guy, my batch, Crow, he's still famous as Crow. We both we both decided to do science at Xavier's in Bombay. So we're sitting there in the last row of the math class, and it starts with he starts talking about vectors. And we both looked at each other and decided, okay,
this is it.
So I went home and told my mom and dad. I said, listen, I know the reality, but really I have to go over to the other side.
Well, kids, I hope you are taking some, inspiration from that. Not doing well in math is not necessarily the end of life.
No.
And getting a shot at a writing career like yours would be any parent's dream. So, so I hope we get that. In terms of skills that you developed at St. Xavier's, and then sort of you would think that they could help our alumni to become better versions of themselves. Is there any 2 or 3 things that you'd like to tell us?
Oh, better versions. I feel like a guru giving serious advice. I don't know. I mean, I think again, I'm stealing from Leo. Generosity, right?
Generosity.
Kindness, and I have to say that was sometimes a rare commodity in the dorms, right?
Totally.
And I think actually sometimes it's harder work to be kind than it is to be indifferent or actively bad to other people. So I think that, and empathy, and for a writer, you spend your life trying to put yourself within the body and mind of your characters who are not people like you, right? So Ganesh Gaitonde, I mean, I've never killed anyone. But even trying to imagine yourself into the body and psychology of somebody who's a murderer, that takes you really have to make an effort to kind of method act your way into that person's head. And I think that's useful in all walks of life, right? Even if you're sitting across a deal-making table, understanding your so-called enemy across that table is going to help you, right? Where they're coming from, what do they want, right? And I actually have to say that the most successful gangsters that I've met are people who understand this, right? They understand psychology. They understand
You had to meet a whole lot of them, is it?
Yeah, when I was doing the research.
Research?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right? So I think for success in any field, this ability to empathize, and these guys weren't especially kind except to their own boys, but that helps. I mean, like we already talked about, discipline, the ability to take risks, right? Resilience, right? I mean, all the things that we want to see in our kids as well, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so, I mean, life is going to get tough, so you need to know how to bounce back and to advocate for yourself. I guess the other thing that I just started reading up on this, it's very interesting. So the act of, so we all know that there's this thing called, what is it called? Active gratitude or something like that, right? So
the gratitude jar by your bedside table.
Right.
Yes.
Right? So the idea that to get a proper perspective on life, you wake up every morning and you be grateful. So this summer I lost a close friend to cancer, right? And that was one of the things that he knew he was going, right? And so he said, listen, just be grateful for every day you have, right? And that really made an impact on me. I've been trying to do it, right? And it's again weird how that makes a great impact on you, but life gets to you and you let that slip away. But the research I've been reading recently is that helps, but what actually helps even more is having gratitude expressed to you, right? So if somebody says to you, thank you, right? Or I'm grateful to you for X and Y, that actually not only has a really profound effect on your mental state, but also your physical state.
I see.
Yeah. So I mean, expressing gratitude towards another person is actually helping them in ways that we don't realize, right? And so I think I don't know where I'm going with this. I don't know how it helps in careers, but I think it's a profound idea that we must take to heart, right?
I completely agree with you. I also believe that given that anybody who comes to Mayo actually comes from a position of privilege in today's society, I think we also should have an exaggerated sense of responsibility, which I don't think we have.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're wading into dangerous waters. What the hell? But so I agree so much with you, and I think India as a whole is still a very feudal and caste-driven culture. Right? We've been hierarchical for centuries and we continue to be so. So one of the things I notice about us, and I include myself in this, is that we treat people below us really badly. Like the waiter in the restaurant, right? The guy who's driving your car, and there's an absolute lack of curiosity about them, and worse, right?
Indifference.
Invisibility.
Rather.
Yeah. And so I think that's really, really harmful to us as people, right? Because you can't inflict indifference and violence on other people without shutting parts of yourself down, right? And, I mean, if you want to think about it selfishly, you just say, would you like somebody to treat your kids like that, right? And it's weird when I see Indians abroad, that falls away instantly because like in the States, you treat a waiter like that, you'll get the plate thrown at you, right? So, but here, because people are poor, they can't afford to do that. The cruelty continues, right? So, I mean, gratefulness even towards your people who work for you, right?
Absolutely, because the moment you step out of India, you realize how much you have to do yourself.
Yeah.
So I always say, I mean, you make to the person who's at my home that, listen, you are the reason I can do so many things.
Yeah.
Without you, I'd be sitting and, sort of looking at, and especially with women, a whole lot of household and childcare and all of that tends to be primarily yours to do. So it just becomes difficult.
But I mean, yes, men should be grateful to women. Yes. Yeah.
Every time we have this conversation, I say that all the men who are attending the reunions, please go back and thank your wives because they are the reason you can have a ball at the reunion.
Yeah. There's a lot of labor which is made invisible, right? Which as an Indian man of a certain age, I'm trying to get better about it, right?
I'm sure your daughters must be straightening you up.
Oh man, they're growing up in Berkeley, right?
Yeah.
And
so imagine that.
And for them, since kindergarten, second grade, they've been talking about issues of social awareness, about, feminism. So they are like ruthless, right? They not only roll their eyes at me when they think I'm saying something stupid, they will call me out.
Call you out. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. My definition of racism has changed thanks to my children. Because you didn't even realize that there was something inherently racist in that statement that you just made. And so I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm glad they do that, right?
Yes.
I mean, it makes you uncomfortable at times to be told by a 12-year-old, right? That you're being a shitty person, right?
No, but also I feel that was social conditioning. We've never put a why to that. We just accepted it. Not that inside of us we mean anything with that. Yeah. So I'm glad we are being called out.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you,
really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, my pleasure.
This podcast is brought to you by Mayo Girls Alumni Association. If you're a Mayoite and wish to participate, email us on mayocollegegirlsalumni@gmail.com.